continue with the parasympathetic nervous system, and then we're going to start chapter 16. I realized the folder actually had chapter 15 in it. It really doesn't matter what order we do it in. I like to do chapter 16 first before chapter 15 because it's more difficult. It gives you time to study it and learn it and wrap your brain around it. Chapter 15 is very much this is this, that is that, this is this, and that is that. So we are going to start chapter 16 tonight, which is the endocrine system. I apologize if you don't have the correct notes or PowerPoint with you. We'll go slow. But I just want to make sure that we're using all of our class time effectively. That is, of course, if we finish the chapter 14. I think we will. So in the last lecture, we were talking all about the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight, right? That kind of get your heart rate up, get your respiration rate up, let's dilate the bronchioles and increase the blood pressure so that we can survive any situation. In this case, we're talking rest and digest. Here, we're talking slow things down. It's literally the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. So here, we're kind of turning off all of the things that were activated in sympathetic innervation. Sometimes we call this the craniosacral division because of where the nerves originate from. And so they actually come off of the brain, the cranial nerves, right? And the sacral nerves from the spinal cord are where these parasympathetic neurons, the preganglionic fibers, come from. And so we'll look at those in a little bit, but this is the gist of it, right? Coming off of some of our cranial nerves, like our facial nerve, our glossopharyngeal nerve, the vagus nerve is the majority of our parasympathetic output. And then some of our sacral nerves, which are innervating some of the abdominal viscera, right? Like our small and large intestine and things like that. Since this is the rest and digest system, that kind of makes sense that we're digesting. Right? Oops. So, here you go. The cranial nerves that are innervating here for parasympathetic. Vagus is number one. This is a huge amount of our, I forget the actual percent. I want to say it's 70%. It could even be 90%. It's an odd number percent. It's the majority of our parasympathetic output is through the vagus nerve. And obviously that's going to regulate our heart, our lungs, and all of our abdominal organs. So the other parasympathetic cranial nerves include branches of the ciliary ganglia. Glossopharyngeal nerve is another one. This is going to synapse and control some of the things that are going on in our tongue, with taste, things like that, right? And so here we're talking about, instead of having alpha and beta receptors, in the parasympathetic we have nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. So parasympathetic. So nicotinic receptors are in all of our postganglionic neurons. So all of them, sympathetic or parasympathetic, they all have nicotinic receptors. So anywhere in our autonomic nervous system, we have nicotinic receptors in our postganglionic neurons. So what that means, let's just kind of review, since we weren't here, it was that video recording. Right, here's our little gingerbread dude. We have the preganglionic neurons coming off of our central nervous system, right, brain and spinal cord. Preganglionic fibers coming off of that, synapsing, right, at a ganglia, somewhere out in the periphery. And I'm doing it on the arm. More than likely this isn't going down the arm. That's not really where sympathetic nerves go. This is just to demonstrate, right? And then we have postganglionic fibers leaving. Right? So that means that in that synapse right there, the receptors for this postganglionic neuron are nicotinic receptors. Muscarinic receptors are then in the parasympathetic organs. So if this was a parasympathetic organ in our arm, which doesn't exist, by the way, but we'll just kind of pretend it does for our drawing sake, the organ here would have muscarinic receptors. In the synapse here, we have nicotinic receptors. Right? And so this is just so the cell knows whether to be excited or inhibited. It's just a form of communication. So all cardiac muscle cells are going to respond to parasympathetic commands, which kind of sounds interesting, right? Because we tend to think of our heart rate as being strongly influenced by our sympathetic nervous system, right? We tend to think, when we think sympathetic, fight or flight, we think increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. But really, what's happening in that situation isn't so much that the sympathetic activation is exciting your heart, it's that the parasympathetic is turning off of your heart. In other words, as you're sitting here right now today, assuming you're not out of breath and you're not like in a fight or flight situation sitting here, right? Maybe you're super nervous about something going on, but assuming you're not, your heart right now has the brakes on. Parasympathetic activation is driving your cardiac cells right now. It's keeping your heartbeat low. It's keeping your blood pressure low. Think about it. When you're driving, it's much easier to put the brakes on and slow down than it is to push the accelerator and speed up. It takes a lot more energy to speed up than it does to slow down. So your body is always working under these slowed down conditions so that all that has to happen in a fight or flight situation is you take your foot off the brake. And as soon as you take your foot off the brake, you automatically go faster, right? Without even trying, without even putting more energy into it, right? And so our parasympathetic nervous system is what's driving and suppressing our cardiac cells. You'll learn more about this in the cardiovascular system next semester, but preganglionic parasympathetic neurons go through the vagus nerve to our heart. That's what's controlling your heart rate, ultimately. It's the parasympathetic division that controls your heart rate, not the sympathetic division. All that happens when you speed up, when your heart rate speeds up, is you just take those brakes off. You take the parasympathetic off so that it naturally speeds up. So, our parasympathetic nervous system can also constrict our pupil, right? Cranial nerve number 3, ocular motor, right? This is going to relax the pupil muscle and allow for more light to come in. This is all done through parasympathetic activation, right? Constricting the pupil there. It's also going to accommodate your lens for near vision, right? When you're under rest and digest, you're not scanning the crowd for the murderer, right? You're not walking down a dark alley looking for someone lurking behind the trash cans. You're resting and digesting. All of your muscles relax. You focus on things that are close, not that are things that are far away. So ultimately it changes the way our eyes work. It's also going to constrict your bronchioles. It makes them smaller. Why? To let less air in. Why? Because you don't need all that air. Why? Because you're resting and digesting. If you're resting and digesting, you don't need as much oxygen. You don't have to breathe as much. You don't have to work as hard to do whatever it is you need to do. It's also going to relax your digestive muscles, right? So it relaxes those sphincter muscles. Sphincter muscles are the round muscles, and so you have them at the top and bottom of your intestines and the top and bottom of your heart. So when you relax those sphincters, it opens them. And that's going to allow digestive juices to flow and digestion to keep moving, which is another reason why this is called the rest and digest. This is literally what's happening to you after you eat your Thanksgiving dinner. You sit there, you eat a lot, and then you relax. And sometimes you take a nap. Why? Because your parasympathetic division's taking over. Sorry, Mom, can't help you with the dishes. I have too much parasympathetic activation going on right now. I need a nap, right? Blame it on your PNS. So this is also going to play a role in the reproductive system. This is what plays a role during erection. This is going to help keep the erection up with the parasympathetic activation. You'll talk more about that, obviously, in the reproductive system next semester. Parasympathetic is also going to allow for gland secretion. So this is a lot of oil and things like that, right? Secretion of enzymes, as well as secretion of exocrine glands like oil glands, lacrimal glands, some of our mucosal glands like saliva, like our salivary glands, right? Rest and digest. We need those digestive juices, the digestive enzymes flowing and secreting. So our parasympathetic plays a role there. So ultimately, the whole goal of the parasympathetic nervous system is to replenish the depletion that happens under sympathetic activation, right? Sympathetic, we're mobilizing our metabolic reserves. We're moving, we're breathing, our heart's beating, our blood pressure's up. Parasympathetic is the exact opposite. It's the recovery period. Now we're replenishing our nutrient reserves. Now we're conserving energy. Now we're lowering our blood pressure to let our heart have a break, right? It's literally the opposite, allowing all of our body to have a resting state. So overall, we see some effects of different target organs and what the parasympathetic nervous system does. So the way this would be asked on a test, this would be a really good short essay, short answer type question. You know, give me some examples of how parasympathetic and sympathetic act maybe on the same organ, right? Give me an example of how the sympathetic nervous system affects your pupil, and how does the parasympathetic affect your pupil, right? Think about that. They literally do the opposite. So you just have to know which one does which, right? How does it affect your digestion? How does it affect your heart? How does it affect your whatever? So let's talk about some side effects of anticholinergic drugs. So many drugs will actually block acetylcholine release. All right, so acetylcholine, one of our major neurotransmitters here in the autonomic nervous system, blocking acetylcholine has some extra effects. So we think of acetylcholine when we think of the neuromuscular junction, right? But acetylcholine plays a very important role here in our autonomic nervous system. So unwanted side effects, urinary retention. By blocking the relaxation of muscles, your bladder is not able to relax and allow the urine out. So this is going to cause you to retain urine, right? You're not going to be able to pee. You might have to actually like push to get the urine out, right? In the case of taking some drugs that are acetylcholine blockers. So these are usually things that are prescribed for like allergies and things like that. Constipation. Again, going back to that concept of the sphincter and smooth muscle relaxation, those muscles won't be able to relax like they need to. It can also cause dry mouth. If you listen to almost any medical device commercial, they almost always say it can cause dry mouth, right? Side effects include dry mouth, blah, 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 constipation, blah, blah, blah. More than likely, if those are the side effects, it's an ACH blocker. So dry mouth is caused by that decreased salivation, the decreased secretion of the glands, right? That's what parasympathetic does. It secretes in the glands, and so there you go. So overall, understanding sympathetic and parasympathetic, they're literally opposites of each other. We're looking at one in survival mode and one in kind of rest and chill mode, right? And so understanding one will help you understand the other. This is just summary slides of giving you some mnemonic devices and how those work. I feel like we've beat that over the head. Whoops. So parasympathetic nervous system restores those resting conditions, gets you back to normal resting conditions. So let's talk about homeostasis. And this is probably the most important piece. So now we have these kind of two pieces of the puzzle. We understand fight or flight. Now we understand rest and digest. But really, almost all of our organs are dual innervated. They have both. So when we're looking at and talking about the heart or the lungs or our digestive system or a particular gland, really that organ is getting a little bit of feedback this way and a little bit of feedback this way. It's getting some sympathetic activation and parasympathetic activation at the same time. There's this kind of hem and haw between the two systems constantly. And that's what creates your resting level of excitement, or your resting level of body composition, how your body performs. So dual innervation is the dominant driving force behind how your body operates in any given day. So this is a really good summary of all of the things, comparing sympathetic and parasympathetic. Well, there we go, I can zoom in. So if we look at sympathetic and parasympathetic, main role, right? Fight or flight versus rest and digest. Location of the preganglionic cell bodies. Thoracolumnar region, right? This is our sympathetic chain ganglia, all of those things. Craniosacral, right, where they're coming. The postganglionic bodies, right, mostly near the vertebral column. These are out near the target cell. These are out and away, next to the adrenal glands or next to the pancreas or wherever. Our preganglionic neurotransmitter, no matter what, is always acetylcholine, right? That's why those ACH blockers can be so damaging. Our postganglionic receptors are always nicotinic, right? Nicotinic receptors. Postganglionic neurotransmitters in our parasympathetic are acetylcholine. In our sympathetic, this is epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? That's the beta 1, beta 2, right? All of those different types of receptors. Adrenergic versus muscarinic, right? The types of cells. Also notice the general setup of these, right? How they're put together and kind of what their mode of secretion is, right? Here we have our preganglionic neuron, our nicotinic receptor. Same concept, preganglionic neuron, nicotinic receptor. So they're very, very similar, but obviously they're different in function. They have opposite functions. So dual innervation creates this idea of autonomic tone. Remember muscle tone, skeletal muscle tone? It's kind of like this resting level of contraction that all of our skeletal muscles had. And when you say that you want to go to the gym to get toned, what you're really saying is you want it to look like you're contracting your muscles without actually contracting your muscles, right? So your smooth muscle has a level of contraction, a resting level of contraction also. It's called autonomic tone. And it's directly related to this kind of in one ear and in the other ear, right? Sympathetic activation, parasympathetic activation. You know, which one is telling it to relax, which one's telling it to contract. It kind of creates this small amount of tension all over the place, right? Whether we're talking digestive system or urinary system or cardiac or respiratory, there's always some level of contraction there no matter what. And that's because they're being told in one ear and in the other ear, right? Sympathetic and parasympathetic to kind of, no, make it. It reminds me of, okay, obviously I have a little girl. The end of Sleeping Beauty, the little fairies are like, make it pink, make it blue, make it pink, make it blue with her dress, and she's like twirling around, and it keeps turning colors. That's what sympathetic and parasympathetic are doing all the time to all of your target organs. Relax, no contract, relax, no contract, relax, no contract. And so your muscles at any time are like this, right? They're kind of, okay, 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 and that creates this resting level of autonomic tone, right? This kind of resting level of contraction. And it's different for each organ, and it varies from time to time. So the autonomic centers of our brain, which are mostly based out of our hypothalamus and our medulla oblongata, so the brain stem, right, our reticular formation, that concept of consciousness and awakeness, right? Those are our main centers for autonomic regulation. That reticular formation, which lies within the brain stem, the medulla oblongata, and our hypothalamus are the main centers to regulate this autonomic tone, this kind of back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So when we look at it from a macro level, when we kind of zoom out, think about how this regulation happens. Our cerebral cortex ultimately has the control over everything, right? Top-down regulation. Well, our hypothalamus is the major regulator. It's taking all of this input from our cerebrum, what we're consciously experiencing, what we're consciously seeing, all of those association areas, right? Did we hear a strange noise? Did we see a movement? You know, did we feel something creepy, right? All of those things, right? Our cerebral cortex makes our hypothalamus aware of it, and the reticular formation controls all of our autonomic centers, right? Parasympathetic and sympathetic. If it's something like we saw something creepy, we saw something move in the corner of the room. Is it a mouse? I don't know, right? That kind of thing goes on. You see it, you become aware of it, you associate. Your hypothalamus, that all passes through your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus, your homeostasis center, senses that, feels that, understands that, and says, you know what? We need to start our sympathetic activation because that mouse is going to kill us, right? That mouse has big teeth and it's going to bite me or it's going to crawl on me and I don't want a mouse near me, right? Whatever your fears about mice are. Sympathetic activation comes over, reticular formation wakes up, right? Get you moving, get your blood pressure up. Oh, I saw it, oh my God, there it is, ah! Right? That whole thing because you saw a mouse. So it always starts in your cerebral cortex. This is why things like meditation and yoga can be really powerful, right? Because meditation and yoga are focusing on the mind-body connection. You detach from the outer world when you're meditating and when you're doing yoga, and you focus inward and you focus into the things that are really driving you and that are really at the center of whatever it is going on in your life. And it kind of puts all of this back into order, if you will. So it's kind of cool. So, there are some disorders that are linked to the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's something called POTS, which stands for postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. Basically, it's low blood pressure. That's literally what it is. So it's characterized by an abnormal increase in heart rate when you stand up. So, or when you move from like a lying position to a standing position. So when you're lying down, when you're resting, your blood pressure is relatively low, right? Your heart doesn't have to pump uphill. It doesn't have to pump against gravity. But as soon as you stand up, there's this hot second that your heart says, whoa, I have to pump really hard right now to get that blood up to the brain, right? And so that causes your heart to kind of flutter, which can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, fainting even. This is why people that are in, say, like a hot tub for a while and they're like relaxing and then they stand up, sometimes people pass out. That's a kind of a common thing around hot tubs. It's because of that sudden increase in blood pressure. Your heart has to kind of catch up a little bit. So it's a symptom of this disorder called POTS. And of course, that's related directly to parasympathetic nervous system. So treatment is just diet. We're monitoring salt and water intake. Salt and water, right, are going to help keep your body full of fluid. And if you have lots of fluid, that means you have a lot of blood volume. And if you have enough blood volume, then you have enough blood pressure. There's that pressure-volume relationship that exists. And we'll look at that more in AP2. So that is autonomic. Do you guys want me to go back to anything autonomic related before we move into the next chapter?
Can I
Go ahead.
make it real quick?